Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video on Windows Server 2008 installation and upgrade. In this video, we're going to start off by taking a look at the different versions of Windows Server 2008. We'll look at the differences between them so that you can make a good educated decision on which version you need in your environment. Then after we look at the different versions, we're going to get right down to it and we're going to install Windows Server 2008 from scratch. And when I say from scratch, I mean from a blank computer, a computer that has a new hard drive with nothing on it. After we install Windows Server 2008, I will show you how to install the Active Directory Domain Services role. Now this is one of the most significant roles within the operating system when working in a Windows Server 2008 network. After we have Windows Server 2008 installed and we see how to install the Active Directory Domain Services role, then I will show you how to upgrade from Windows Server 2003 in case you have any of those old computers laying around that need to be upgraded. Now the first thing we need to do before installing Windows Server 2008 is to take a look at the different versions that are available, looking at the features that those versions have to offer, and then determine which one would be most appropriate to meet our needs. Now there's 5 versions that we're going to talk about here. We have Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, Data Center Edition, Windows Web Server 2008, and then a version that is designed specifically for Itanium-based systems. So let's take a look at each one of these individually. First we have the Standard Edition. Now there's 2 places that I see Standard Edition being most appropriate. The first would be in your small to medium-sized organization, one that is using a single server solution, or maybe you just have 2 or 3 servers. If you have a small quantity of servers and you just need to have basic server needs met, Windows Server 2008 Standard Edition will completely meet those needs. Now the second scenario might be in a larger organization where you just need a simple server to meet a standard networking role. Like maybe you just need a simple DNS server, or maybe you just need a simple DHCP server, or maybe you just need a simple router setup and you want to use one of your servers for that. Well, these are all scenarios where you might use Standard Edition. Now the other thing I want to point out here is that with each one of these editions, there is both a 32-bit and a 64-bit version available, and each one has different memory and processor support. So here, you'll see here that the 32-bit version of Standard Edition can support up to 4 gigabytes of physical RAM, of physical memory, and up to 4 processors using symmetric multiprocessing. The 64-bit version supports the same 4 processors, but you'll see here that it gives you up to 32 gigabytes of physical RAM capabilities. And that's fairly significant, the difference between 4 gigabytes and 32 gigabytes of RAM. So that is one thing you want to keep in mind as well when determining which edition you want to use. Even though you may decide, well, Standard Edition does it for me, do you have a computer that only needs 4 gigabytes, or do you need more memory support? Now the next version I want to talk to you about is Enterprise Edition. This version is designed to meet the needs of larger organizations, and I'll tell you what, the main reason why is because it provides all the features and all the functionality that Standard Edition does, but it now adds failover clustering, which means you can have much more reliability of your high-end resources. Another feature is that it also provides ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. This is so that you can have interoperability between your Active Directory environment and another company's environment. You can actually share resources between 2 or more organizations in a secure fashion. Now this is stuff that we're going to talk about later on in this course. We'll get into the specifics about failover clustering. But again, let's take a look here. The 32-bit version has support for up to 64 gigabytes of RAM and up to 8 processors, while the 64-bit version can support, and get this, up to 2 terabytes of RAM. Most people are not even aware of where you could find a computer that would support 2 terabytes of RAM. But if you do, Windows Server 2008 Enterprise Edition will support it. And again, we can support 8 processors. Now we get into Data Center Edition. Data Center Edition is designed to meet the needs of very large organizational needs. It has everything that we have talked about in both Standard and Enterprise Edition. So we have failover clustering and ADFS, and we have all the things that we have in those other lower versions. But we also now have a version of Windows Server 2008 that comes with unlimited virtualization rights. Now, again, we'll talk in more detail about virtualization and what that is and what that means later on in this course. But the unlimited virtualization rights basically means that you can install an unlimited number of pretty much any edition of Windows Server 2008 in a virtual machine by simply licensing Data Center Edition. Now, I know that sounds a little bit confusing right now because we haven't really talked about virtualization, but basically you can create these virtual machines, many virtual machines that run on a single machine, and you don't have to individually license those machines. If you have gone out and spent the money on Data Center Edition, you can create all the virtual machines you want. So this will make a lot more sense when we get into the virtualization video. Now, one thing you also need to know about Data Center Edition is that it can only be purchased OEM. What that means is you can't go down to your local store and just grab Data Center Edition off the shelf. You can do that with Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition, but not Data Center Edition. Data Center Edition is a big deal. The only way you can get it is by purchasing it from some of the larger hardware manufacturers, Dell, Hewlett-Packard, companies like that, who take the time to already have the system pre-installed and tested, and that way you know that all the hardware is going to have drivers and is going to be fully functional with this edition. And that is significant when you get to this type of large organizational needs. Now, speaking of large organizational needs, check this out. The 32-bit version supports, even that old 32-bit version, supports up to 64 gigabytes of physical RAM and up to 32 processors. Now, with today's processors, I mean, if you picture, processors that are functioning now at what, 2, 3, 4 gigahertz, and you multiply that by 32, imagine the power you would have in this machine. And if you think that's powerful, look at the 64-bit version. Now you can have up to 2 terabytes of RAM and up to 64 processors. So that's kind of the big deal with Data Center Edition, is it really comes down to if you have super high-end memory and processing needs, that's when you're going to go to your Data Center Edition. Now, taking a step back, matter of fact, taking a step all the way back from Data Center Edition, going all the way down to Windows Web Server 2008. Windows Web Server 2008 is designed to function specifically as a single-purpose web server, meaning it is exactly what it says it is. It's designed to be a web server, and that's it. You can't install Active Directory on Windows Web Server 2008. You're very limited in the roles that you can install on Windows Web Server 2008. This particular product, or I should say this particular version, was designed for companies that have the need to put together a web farm. You need to have a cluster of web servers. Now, this version has a 32-bit version that supports 4 gig of RAM and 4 processors, and a 64-bit version that supports 32 gigabytes of RAM and up to 4 processors. Essentially the same as what we saw with Standard Edition, but now stripped down as far as functionality. The good news is Windows Web Server 2008 costs less, and that's the idea behind it. The last version here is a version that's great for Itanium-based systems. It is designed to be used strictly with the Intel Itanium 64-bit processing systems. Okay, you can't veer away from that. Now, this is a specialized 64-bit processor that's more advanced than the regular 64-bit processors that are out there. Now, one quick note, because it is a specific 64-bit processor, there's no 32-bit version. There's only the 64-bit version, and it does support up to 2 terabytes of RAM and up to 64 processors, just like your data center 64-bit version does as well. The advantage between this and Data Center Edition is that the Itanium processor has very specific capabilities. And I will tell you what, for more information, here's a website that you can go to see all the specific details and advantages of this version. But I'll tell you what, you're not looking at this version unless you own the hardware to match. And if you own that hardware, you already are at least somewhat aware of the advantages, or else you wouldn't have purchased it. So these are all the different versions that are available to you. And again, for more information, I have a URL listed here, which will give you an overview of all the editions, as well as links to specific details about the individual editions. Now, one other comment that I will tell you before we go on is that in your given environment, you may not explicitly use one version. As I mentioned back when we were talking about Standard Edition, you may be in a larger environment where you have Enterprise Edition needs, but you might have individual servers that will have isolated needs in which Standard Edition is fully acceptable, and you may want to save the money from just purchasing Enterprise Edition across the board. Okay, so understand that there may be some mixing and matching going on in any given organization or any given environment, but you should know the basic idea. And just to kind of recap, the basic idea is Standard Edition is for when you have a low quantity of servers, very basic needs. Enterprise Edition when you have an increasing amount of servers and you have clustering needs. Data Center Edition for when you have super high-end memory and processing needs. Windows Web Server 2008 specifically for web server needs. And Itanium-based system when you have, hey, you figured it, Itanium-based systems. All right, well, now that we know about the different versions of Windows Server 2008, let's go learn how to do this. Now, there's a very good chance that you have installed Windows Server 2008 before, and that's fine. I'm going to take you through a real basic walkthrough on how to do it. But I will tell you, if you haven't done it before, if you've never installed Windows Server 2008 before, even though it's very simple to do, I strongly recommend that you do it. That when you're learning how to do this stuff, just go do it. Doing it once will give you that confidence when you have to go out there and do it in a production environment. After we install Windows Server 2008, I'll show you how to install the Active Directory Domain Services role, and we will do so specifically setting up our forest root domain controller. Now I'll explain a couple of those terms to you a little bit later in this course, but the forest root is the very first domain controller that you would install in really any given Windows Server 2008 network. Now after we set up our first server, including installing Active Directory, I will then show you how to upgrade an old Windows Server 2003 server to Windows Server 2008. So let's go ahead and get started on that now. Okay, so here we are at our blank brand new computer that has a brand new hard drive with nothing on it. That's why you're looking at a blank screen right now, because first thing I need to do is turn on the computer. So let me flip the switch now. Okay, I have turned on the computer, and I'll tell you what, while we wait for the computer to boot, I want to tell you that there are two things that I've already done to this computer, and if you're trying to follow along, make sure you do this as well. The two things that I've done is, number one, I've already put my Windows Server 2008 DVD in the DVD drive. The second thing that I've done is that I've set this computer's BIOS to start up off the DVD drive. That way it booted directly off the Windows Server 2008 DVD that's already in the drive. Okay, so here we are, the files have loaded and we're on our first intro screen. And you'll see here that there's just some basic information about what language and country you're installing from. And in my case, I speak English and I am installing in the United States. So everything is already set. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And you'll see here that there's not a whole lot to know here. There's not a whole lot of options. Here we have what to know before installing Windows, where it'll go through the Windows Server 2008 minimum requirements and things like that. And then also, if this was a repair that we were trying to do as opposed to a fresh installation, we would have some repair options. Now, this is a link that we'll take a look at later on when we talk about backup and recovery. But for right now, we just want this option right here, Install Now. So let me click that. And you'll see here that we get a please wait, because what it's doing is it's going through a process of loading the rest of the files that are needed to install the operating system. Now, I will tell you, most of the installation process will be a matter of clicking a couple of next buttons and making a couple of brief selections, one of which we have right here, and then mostly just a whole lot of waiting. So anyway, the first thing we have here is we have to choose what version we want to install. And you'll see the three choices that I have are Standard, Enterprise, and Data Center, either as a full installation or as a Server Core installation. Now, Server Core is a stripped down version of Windows Server 2008, which again we will talk about a little bit later on in this course. So we're going to look at the full installation options right now, and you'll notice over here the architecture is x86, and that means that I'm running the 32-bit version of this operating system. Whether you have the 32-bit or the 64-bit, if you're trying to follow along, really doesn't matter. It's just that right here you'll see it'll be 64-bit instead of x86. Now, as far as picking which version, I'm going to select the Enterprise Edition, and the reason why is because we are actually working in a fairly large environment. The Global Mantix Corporation is worldwide, and we are going to have clustering needs. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Enterprise Edition. Now, one other side note I want to tell you is that we may not need Enterprise Edition on every one of our servers in the Global Mantix organization. Just as I told you before, we might have some servers that are going to have simplistic networking needs. But for this course, we're going to go ahead and use Enterprise Edition throughout. So I've selected Enterprise, and I'm going to click on Next. Now I get my license agreement for use of this particular operating system, and you'll see that it is quite lengthy. If you've never taken a look at it and you have any uncertainty as to exactly what your particular abilities or rights are in using this operating system, feel free to read it all. Once you have done so, check the box saying that you accept these license terms and click Next. Now I have the choice of either upgrading from a previous operating system or custom. And custom would be to install a clean copy of Windows, which is what we're going to do here. As a matter of fact, not only is that what we're going to do here, but you'll notice here it says upgrade has been disabled. Why has it been disabled? Well, because there's no operating system on this computer to upgrade. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just click on custom to do a clean copy of Windows. Now I need to decide where I want to install Windows. Now this particular computer has one 80 gig hard drive on it. So if I want, I could click on drive options, and this would allow me to go ahead and create a new partition. So I could do partitioning of this hard drive, or I could ask to go ahead and format this hard drive. But in this case, I am going to just allow Windows to take the entire hard drive and turn it into one single partition. And I do this by just clicking Next. Once I click Next, it's going to go ahead and automatically, even though it doesn't even say it here, it's automatically going to create that one single partition, and it's going to format it. From there, we have the copying of files, which you'll see has just completed. It will then expand those files because everything is compressed on the DVD. Then it will go through and install all the features and updates, and we'll see that we have some options in completing the installation. Now, this is definitely one of those wait periods that I was talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and if you're following along, please pause the video as well. And then when this process is done and we're on the next screen where we're being asked to do something, I'll go ahead and resume the recording of this video, and you can resume the playback of this video. So I will see you in just a moment. Okay, I'm back, and what has happened is all of the steps that we saw on the screen just a moment ago have completed, and the system has rebooted, and believe it or not, the installation, the true for logging on for the first time. Now, the user that it's referring to is the built-in all-powerful administrator account. So let me go ahead and click OK, and you'll see here that it says administrator, and it wants me to give it says new password, but really we haven't given it a password before, so we're giving it a password for the first time. So let me go ahead and enter that now. And I will tell you, it really doesn't matter what password you use. It's recommended that you use something secure, something that has letters and numbers and symbols and is not easily guessable by people. But anyway, if you're following along, put in whatever password you're comfortable with. And then I'm going to go ahead and click this little arrow. And you'll see here that it says it's changing the password, and the password has been changed. I'll click OK. This network right now. Most of today's networks are still not using IP version 6. So for right now, we're going to focus on IP version 4. I'm going to highlight IP version 4 by clicking on the words over here and then click Properties. Now, the default is that it has been set to obtain an IP address automatically and obtain its DNS server address automatically. I don't want this particular server to be receiving its IP address automatically because it's going to be a server of great significance. This is going to be the forest root domain controller when we're done. So I'm going to click the button to use a specific IP address, and the IP address that I'm going to use is 192.168.10.201. Now, the reason I'm going to use that IP address is because the network that I'm in right here right now is the 192.168.10 network, and I've already determined an IP addressing scheme for my computers, and in this case my servers are going to all be 201 through, well, as far as we need to go, but probably no more than 201 through 210. We're probably not going to need more than those 10 servers. If we do, we'll say 201 through 220. This is something that you should do. You should determine that your servers will be in a certain range, your clients will be in a certain range, things like that. Now, if I hit Tab, you'll see here that it defaults to a subnet mask of 222.55.0, and that is correct because we are on the 192.168.10 network. My default gateway is 192.168.10.200. That is the IP address of the router that I have here on my network right now to get out to the internet. If you're trying to follow along, please make sure that you put in an appropriate IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway to the network that you're sitting at right now. Now, as far as preferred DNS server goes, I'm going to go ahead and put in myself. I'm going to put in my own IP address and point to myself for DNS needs. And the reason why is because in just a few moments we are going to install the Active Directory Domain Services role, and as part of that it will automatically install and configure the DNS server role, which is a requirement for Active Directory. So for right now, put in a valid IP address in your network, a valid subnet mask, the default gateway if you want to be able to get out to other networks or out to the internet. This is not actually a required component, but I do know that there may be times that we will want to go ahead and get out to the internet and look at things. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And then point to yourself for DNS, meaning this IP address should be this IP address. And then click OK and close. And then we'll go ahead and close the network connections window. This takes us back to the initial configuration task wizard. And we need to provide a computer name and domain. Click on that link. You'll see here that right now I have a kind of funky random computer name, and I'm currently part of a work group. The way I change that is, well, you'll never guess. That's right, click on the change button. So click on that change button, and I need to go ahead and give this computer a name. Because this computer is in New York, I'm going to call it NY for New York. Because it's going to be a domain controller, I'm going to put DC. This is the first domain controller, so I'm going to make it DC1. And because it's the Windows Server 2008 operating system, I'm going to put 2K8 for 2008. This is something that is important to do when you are naming your servers. You should use an appropriate naming convention that allows administrators to quickly and easily recognize what server they're on. Now, down here, we need to decide if we want to make it a member of a domain. And in this case, the answer is no, because we are not joining an existing domain. We are going to be creating the domain. So we're going to leave it alone with being part of a work group. So I'm going to click OK. And you see here that we get a message saying that we have to reboot the computer in order to apply these changes. So I'll click OK to that message. I'm going to close this window. And again, it's saying you must restart. So it wants to know if I want to do it right now. And I'm going to say yes, I want to restart right now. So I'll click the Restart Now button. And once again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video until the system has completed rebooting. And then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so the computer has now rebooted and we are brought back to a log on screen. And so I'm going to do exactly what it says. It says press Control-Alt-Delete, so I'm going to press that now. And then I need to enter my password for the administrator account, so I'll enter that. And either hit enter or click this little arrow, either way. And you'll see here that it's going to log us back into our desktop. Now what it's also going to do is, besides bringing us to a desktop, is it's going to reopen the initial configuration task utility. And the reason it's going to go ahead and open that utility is because there's a checkbox right down here. Do not show this window at logon. And I didn't check that box. And I'm not going to check that box until we've gone through all the steps. That way, if there are any other reboots that are required, we can go ahead and have those without having to worry about forgetting some of these steps. All right, so where were we? Well, we needed to provide a computer name and domain, and we did that. We named it New York DC1 2K8 and left it part of a work group. So the next step would be to enable automatic updating and feedback. If I click on that link, you will see here that I have the opportunity to enable Windows automatic updating and feedback. This is really just enabling automatic updates, and if you want this server to automatically receive its updates and not have to manually go out there and do it, then enable it. So I'm going to click the link to enable this. Now the next step is to download and install updates. Now here's what I want to tell you. It is very important that you do indeed download and install updates before you put this server into production. And the reason why is because there are many security related updates that I'm sure have already come out from the time that this DVD was originally pressed, which I don't know if you remember, but it said January 2008 is when this DVD was pressed, and now. But here's what I need to tell you. I can't for DNS, and I'm not a DNS server. So I'm going to actually skip this step until after I have become a DNS server, and we will come back to this step. So from there, we go to the next step, which is to add roles. And this is where we're going, and then it's going to run a utility called DC Promo, which stands for Domain Controller Promotion, meaning we're going to promote this machine to a domain controller, which will take us into an additional little wizard. So let me go ahead and click Install, and you will see here that we are again looking at the waiting game. We're just going to wait for this bar to go across the screen, and the Active Directory domain services will then be installed. So as I had done before, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be right back with you as soon as it's complete. The bar has gone across the screen, and as you can see here, it says that the Active Directory domain services installation has succeeded. Now down here, it goes on to say that from there we have to run the DC Promo executable to really get a fully functional domain controller. So you'll see here there's a link for the closing of this wizard and launching the DC Promo utility. So I'm going to click that link now. When I do that, you'll see here that that window closed, and now I have the Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard. I'm going to go ahead and click on Next through the welcome screen, and you get a little message here about operating system compatibility and things that will and won't work if you go all the way back to the days of Windows NT 4. I'm going to click on Next. Here you'll see that we need to choose a configuration. Are we going to be joining an existing forest, or are we creating a new domain in a new forest? And that's what we're doing. This is the beginning of a brand new forest. Now, don't worry if some of the terminology that you see in this wizard is confusing. If you have not studied Active Directory before watching this video, later on in this course, I'm going to go through the Active Directory terminology and make sure that you fully understand it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that my selection and click on Next. Now I need to give the forest a name. And the name of our forest is going to be globalmantics.com. That is the name of the forest for the Global Mantics network. And then click on Next. You will see here that it checks to see if this name is already in use. Once it realizes that it's not, it verifies that the NetBIOS name, which would just be Global Mantics, is not in use. It's not. You'll see everything went through just fine. The next thing I need to do is determine a forest functional level. Now this specifically has to do with what other operating systems you may be running domain controllers on. If this forest was going to go ahead and include Windows 2000, Server 2003, and Windows Server 2008 domain controllers, and I want to emphasize domain controllers, well, then we would have to be on Windows 2000 functional level. If, however, we only have Server 2003 and Windows Server 2008 domain controllers running, then we could select the Windows Server 2003 functional level. And if we are going to be using Windows Server 2008 domain controllers exclusively, which, by the way, that's what we will be doing here, we'll be using Windows Server 2008 exclusively, then we can put it to the Windows Server 2008 functional level. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, what if you're not sure, or what if, what's the harm in just leaving it at Windows 2000? Well, although this provides for backward compatibility to those older operating systems, along with that backward compatibility is a loss of certain features that are only understood by Windows Server 2008. Now, the other thing I will tell you is if you're ever not sure, always leave it with the older functional level, because you can always increase the functional level, but you can never decrease the functional level. But in this case, I am confident Windows Server 2008 is all I need, so I'm going to set that functional level and click Next. Now it examined the DNS configuration, and what it realized is that, we might need DNS to support Active Directory, and it might be a good idea to go ahead and make this machine a DNS server to support that. And that's why I had you point the DNS server to the same IP address as this machine, is because I knew we were going to do this. Now you'll also notice that besides being a DNS server, this first domain controller in the forest, there's a checkbox here for global catalog, and it's grayed out. And that's because down here it says it must be a global catalog server. And you'll notice it says it cannot be an RODC, read-only domain controller, and that's why this is grayed out without a checkbox. I will explain read-only domain controllers in a later video in this course. So for right now, we're going to be a global catalog server, and we are going to go ahead and be a DNS server. So I'm going to click Next. It tells me now that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created, and what that basically means is that a delegation from the parent zone, and without getting into a full explanation of DNS zones, what that basically means is globalmantics.com, the parent in that hierarchy would be just .com. So what it's basically saying is I can't create a delegation on the .com servers, which are out on the internet, and I don't even have access to the internet yet, to globalmantics.com. So basically it's just saying, are you sure you want to do this? Because there may not be an understanding of what globalmantics.com is up on those .com servers. And you know what? We don't need for it to be. And this is actually very common. In an internal environment, when you're creating your forest root, you're going to almost always get this message because there's not going to be a parent server for you to put that delegation of understanding in. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes that I want to continue. I'm aware of this problem. From here, I need to decide where do I want to put my database, log files, and sysvol folder. Now, the sysvol folder is used for replication between domain controllers. And we only have the one hard drive and the one partition on this computer to split my database and log files apart. But in this case, we're just going to take the defaults and click Next. Now, I need a password for Directory Services Restore Mode. And this has to do with backup and recovery. There is a certain way of booting this computer and going into in the waiting game because it is going to set up the DNS server role, and it's going to actually pre-configure DNS to go ahead and already have a zone that it supports globalmantics.com. It's going to be Active Directory integrated and a whole lot of stuff that you may not understand at this point. Because I haven't really explained DNS, and if you haven't studied it previously, you're not going to understand it. But I'll tell you what, here's what you do need to know. Microsoft has configured this to set up DNS appropriately without you ever having to know it. Okay, if you're going to be a DNS administrator, great. But if you're not, you don't need to know it. This is going to set up for you just the way it's supposed to. After DNS is set up, which you can see here it is already done, it's going to now set up the Active Directory domain services and turn this computer into a domain controller. Now, this is going to take a few more moments, so I'm going to stop talking, I'm going to pause the video, and I'll be right back with you when it's done. Matter of fact, I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to tell you that when this is done, it is going to require a reboot. So I'm going to go ahead and check the box and say, just go ahead and reboot the computer when you're done. So I'm going to pause the video and be back with you after the installation is complete and the computer has rebooted. Okay, so Active Directory has installed, and as I mentioned, the computer was set to automatically reboot, and it has rebooted. So we're going to go ahead and log back in, hit Control-Alt-Delete, and then we need to go ahead and enter our password. And what will happen is this is going to take us back to our desktop, and what should happen is it should take us back into our initial configuration tasks as well. So let's take a look and see what happens. All right, here we have our desktop. It's loading up. And here we are with the initial configuration task utility. And you'll notice here that everything's loading, and as it's loading, around here with add roles, still looking for what roles we've added. Let me go ahead and scroll this down a little bit. There we go. And there we go. You can see here that Active Directory Domain Services and DNS server roles have been added. And along those lines, you'll also notice that under Add Features, we already have Group Policy Management and Remote Server Administration Tools, what's also sometimes known as RSAT, has also been added. Now, Group Policy and RSAT are a couple of things that I'm going to talk to you specifically about later on in this course. Matter of fact, along those same lines, Remote Desktop is also something that we will talk about later on in this course. But in order to enable it, in other words, in order to allow other computers to be able to remote desktop into this server, we have to enable it. So I'm going to click that link and go ahead and allow connections from computers running any version of remote desktop. And you'll notice it says that's less secure. Basically, you could allow connections only from computers running remote desktop with network level authentication, the newer clients. But in case we want to go ahead and still do it from Windows XP, which we're going to do in this course, I'm going to go ahead and select the less secure option. Now up here you'll notice a message has opened up that says that a remote desktop firewall exception is going to go ahead and be enabled, and that's so that we can go ahead and get through our firewall with remote desktop. So I'll click OK. And I could select specific users who are going to be able to remote desktop in, but we don't need to because for right now the administrator is allowed to by default, and that's the only user we have. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you'll see here that remote desktop has now been enabled, and Windows Firewall is on by default, so there's nothing else we have to do there. And that takes us all the way to the bottom of the initial configuration tasks tool. But we skipped a step, right? We skipped download and install updates. Now we should have internet access at this point, so let me go ahead and click this link and check for updates. Now I will tell you, if we did not do this step, it would have been done for us anyway. And the reason it would have been done for us anyway is because we enabled automatic updates. So even though if we would have forgotten this step, it would have been done as part of the automatic update process, and when it went through that process throughout the day and overnight, all of these important updates would have been installed. But we're going to go ahead and do it now. So I'm going to click Install Updates. And if I didn't want to just take the default, if I wanted to select, I could choose View Available. And if I click on that, you'll see here that it shows me all the updates that are there. You'll notice that some of them are not selected, and that's because those are optional. Now, as it turns out, they're recommended. So I'm going to go ahead, and because I have researched these in the past, and I know that it's safe to install these, I'm going to go ahead and select all those boxes as well. And then here we have the update for the Windows Server 2008 Server Manager, and I'm going to go ahead and select that one as well. And now I'm going to click Install. So now I'm getting not only the required updates, but the optional updates as well. I'm going to accept the license terms for the Windows Malicious Software Removal Tool for November of 2008. Click Finish. And now it's going to go through and it's going to download and install 31 updates. Now, depending on when you're watching this video, you may have more than these 31 updates. Depending on what version of Windows Server 2008 you installed, you may have less or more of these updates as well. But again, and I know you're probably sick of hearing this, we are again at the waiting game. So once again, I will pause the video and be right back with you as soon as these updates are complete. And again, let me mention, part of these updates are going to involve a reboot. When these are done, this button right here is going to switch to Restart Now. And I'm going to go ahead and reboot and then restart the video and be back with you. All right, so at long last, all of the updates have downloaded and have installed, and it prompted me to reboot the computer. Went ahead and rebooted, and here we are waiting to log in again. So let me press Control-Alt-Delete and go ahead and log in, enter my password here. All right, and now we should pretty much be at the point that we are completely installed and configured and ready to use this machine in a production environment. So what's going to happen here is the initial configuration task window is going to open yet again, because I still didn't check the box telling it not to. And here it is. So just to quickly review, I did set the time zone. I did configure networking. I gave it a computer name, which, by the way, the domain, you'll notice it no longer says workgroup. It says domain globalmantics.com, because now we're a domain controller. And then here we have automatic update and feedback. That's turned on. Downloaded and installed updates. Went ahead and did so. If we scroll down here, add roles, we went ahead and made ourselves an Active Directory Domain Services domain controller as well as a DNS server. That included the group policy management and RSAT features. Enabled remote desktop so that we'll be able to remotely manage this computer. Windows Firewall is on. That's it. We're done. We're good to go. So I'm going to say do not show this window at logon and close. Now when I close that window, guess what? Another window opens up. And this window is the Server Manager. Oh, see, here's our little balloon telling us that Windows installed new updates, which of course we know because we just did that. I'm going to close that balloon. And anyway, the Server Manager is a great little utility, or I almost shouldn't even say little. It's just a great, huge utility, which allows us to do all of the common things that we would need to do to manage this server. Now you'll see here under roles, if I expand that, you'll see here's the Active Directory Domain Services and DNS server role, and they can be managed from right here. But anyway, we'll come back and look at the Server Manager at a later time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say do not show this at logon. I don't want this window to open up every single time I log in. If I close that window, you'll see if I ever want to get it back, I can just click on Start, and then here's Server Manager. Okay, so I can always get back to it anytime I want. Now, before we go on to the next step, which is looking at how to upgrade from Windows Server 2003, I want to take you back for just a moment and take a look at the global Mantix network as a whole so you can see what other computers we need to set up to make this all happen in this video. So let's take a look at that right now. So here we have a diagram of the global Mantix network, where first of all we have our New York office, which has 6 servers and 500 clients, but we're not going to worry about that information right now. What is significant about the New York office is that is where we are going to host the forest root domain globalmantix.com. That's why the server we just created was called New York DC1, because that's where our corporate headquarters is and that's where the forest root's going to be. But then we have the Chicago office, and really the Chicago and the Dallas office, where we are going to be hosting the NA, which stands for North America, .globalmantix.com domain, and this will be a child domain within our forest. And then we have the Tokyo office, which is going to host the Asia.globalmantix.com domain. Now, let me see if I can make the route up here in New York. We've got North America down here between Chicago and Dallas, and then we've got Asia over here in Tokyo. Now, in order to do what I'm doing here, and in order to follow along with the rest of this course, it's significant that you follow all the same instructions we've gone through in this, demonstrating something specifically on these domain controllers in any of the videos. These are the 3 domain controllers which are going to keep the Global Mantix Corporation functioning. Okay, so make sure you get those 3 servers going. Whether you use 3 actual hardware servers or whether you use virtual machines of some kind, that really doesn't matter as long as you have the 3 servers going. Now, there are other computers that we will create as we go through the different videos, but I will explain each one of those servers as they are needed. Now, one of those additional servers that we're going to need to demonstrate things in the course, we need right now. Now, on the screen here, again, is all the various computers that we may use at any given point in time. Now, again, you don't have to have them all installed, so don't worry about having, I think there's 14 total machines up and running at once. I won't have them up and running at once here. But the one we need right now is going to be Chicago Mem1 2003, and that's because this is representing the member servers in Chicago, which are still running Windows Server 2003, and we want to take a look at how to do an upgrade of one of those servers. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to Chicago Member 1 2003 right now. Okay, now if you are following along, all you need to do really is you don't necessarily have to create the server and join the Chicago or North America.globalmantix.com domain. Pretty much any Windows Server 2003 computer will do it. And here I have one that is Windows Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. And so I'm going to go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete to log in. Enter in my administrator password. And here you will see that not only is it Windows Server 2003, but let me click on Start and right-click on my computer and Properties. One thing you need to know before you do the upgrade is it must be at least Service Pack 1. If you don't have Service Pack installed at all on Windows Server 2003, you'll get an error when you go to do the upgrade. Reality is, if you're running Windows Server 2003 right now, considering we are beyond Service Pack 1, we're on Service Pack 2, it is highly unlikely you would still be running with no service packs whatsoever. So usually this won't be an issue. And in this case, I've intentionally put in Service Pack 1 so that we can see how it will progress from there. So let me go ahead and cancel out of here. Now, the next thing I need to do is put in the Windows Server 2008 DVD. And actually, I already have it in, so let me click Start and go to my computer. And then here's the DVD, so I'll just double click on it. And I'll actually close Explorer in the background. And you'll see here it jumps right into the Windows installation window. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Install Now. And if you haven't figured out from the rest of this video, yep, there's going to be a lot of waiting once again. But I want to go ahead and show you how the screens differ, just slightly from what they would look like if you were doing a regular installation. And the first one is right here. Microsoft recommends that you go online and get the latest updates for installation to make sure that any bugs that they may have found along the way since this DVD was pressed have all been worked out. And that's why this is recommended. And they even kind of scare you a little bit right here where it says do not get the latest updates, and it says without these updates it might fail. I mean, really give you the red shield with the X. They really kind of scare you there. But it is a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Go Online to get the latest updates button. And then here it's going to go through, and this will take just a few moments while it will search, and then it should locate a couple of updates that they've had. And it's very minimal. I want to say at this point in time, I think there's one like 800 kilobyte update that it's going to find. And then it will go ahead and take us to the actual installation. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come right back as soon as it's done finding these updates. Okay, as you can see there, it found an update, and now the installation is restarting, and now it's going to take us into the full-blown installation like we've seen before. So we'll take just a moment here. And there we go. Now it takes us into the selection of what version we want to install. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick Enterprise Edition just as we have in the past. But actually, to go a step further, this version of Windows Server 2003 was also Enterprise Edition. And Enterprise Edition Server 2003, you typically want to keep it at the same level when you go to Server 2008. There are some instances that you don't have to stick the same, like as for instance if it was Standard Edition of Server 2003 you could upgrade to Enterprise Edition Server 2008, but generally whatever you were using in Server 2003 you're going to stick with the same in Server 2008. So anyway, I'm going to pick Enterprise Full Installation, click Next, and now here we have our license agreement, so I will accept the terms, click Next. And now I get the choice, do I want to do a clean install, which really at that point, I could have just done by booting off the DVD and not going through all the steps we've already done. So obviously we want to upgrade. So I'm going to go ahead and click that right now. And here you get a little warning about a compatibility report. And it goes on to tell you that all of your hardware and software, you're really going to want to check and make sure it's supported, because that could be a real problem. You may have hardware that was fully supported by Server 2003 and there aren't drivers yet for Server 2008. And you may have applications that were written for Windows Server 2003 and maybe that developer doesn't exist anymore, isn't updating their product anymore, and won't be compatible with Server 2008. So these are things you want to take into consideration. Now if I scroll down here, you will see here that it does find a potential issue. Okay, and you'll notice it says you can still upgrade, but you might have some issues. And the issues are, it says here, other devices, multimedia audio controller. Now basically that's the sound card that's in my computer, which you'll notice because it says other devices, we didn't even have the drivers for Windows Server 2003, and that's why it's recognizing a problem, because it looks like we're not going to have the drivers for Server 2008 either. So anyway, we're not worried about the sound card for right now, but I will tell you, if this was a production machine and there was any hardware that showed up here as a potential issue, I'd probably want to stop what I was doing right now, research as to whether there are any drivers or not, and figure out whether I want to replace the hardware or what I want to do. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And we're on our way, upgrading Windows. You'll notice it says that's all we need right now. Your computer will reboot a few times. It's going to copy files, gather, expand, install, and complete the process. You'll notice right here it says it may take several hours to complete. So rather than having you sit and stare at this screen with me for the next few hours, I don't actually believe it'll take a few hours. Depending on the hardware you have, it's probably going to take closer to 20 to 30 minutes. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video once again, and I'll be back with you after these steps have completed. Okay, well, all of the upgrade installation procedures have completed. We've gone through our multiple reboots and we're sitting at a logon screen. So let's go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete, enter our administrator password. Let's go ahead and log in. So, well, here you'll notice the first time we log back in the desktop, it's finding the multimedia audio controller that, oh, there it goes. Let me pop that back up on the screen. That it said we were going to have a problem with before because it couldn't find the drivers. So I'm going to go ahead and for right now, I'm going to cancel out of this message. Again, in a production environment, you definitely want to address that. You either want to get the audio controller out, disable it, or get the appropriate drivers. But outside of that, it took us into our server manager, which always opens by default when we log in, unless, of course, we check the box saying, don't show me this console at login. So I'll go ahead and do that and close out of the server manager. And that's pretty much it. We have now upgraded from Windows Server 2003 to Windows Server 2008. Okay, so now that we have completed an upgrade from Windows Server 2003, let's go over a couple of points to make sure that we remember. First of all, the upgrade must be done from within the operating system. You can't boot off of a Windows Server 2008 DVD and select upgrade. It will always be disabled. So it must be done from within the Windows Server 2003 operating system. Now, the second bullet point here says you can only upgrade to the same version or higher. Well, that's kind of true, and I mentioned that while we were doing the upgrade. As a for instance, if you presently have Standard Edition of Windows Server 2003, you can only go to Standard Edition 2008 or Enterprise Edition 2008. If you are running Enterprise Edition, well then you can only do Enterprise Edition. Now I know you might be thinking, well wait a minute, what about some of those other versions like Data Center Edition or Windows Web Server? Well, those two particular versions have to be upgraded directly to the same version. So Data Center Edition of Windows Server 2003 must go to Data Center Edition of Windows Server 2008. And Web Edition of Server 2003 must go to Web Server 2008. So yes, it's kind of true you can only upgrade to the same or higher, but really the only one that can go to a higher version would be Standard Edition. Now the next thing that you need to know is that you must stay within the same architecture. And what I mean by that is if you are currently running a 32-bit version of Windows Server 2003, then you must go to a 32-bit version of Windows Server 2008. And if you're running 64-bit, then you must go to 64-bit. You cannot upgrade from one to the other unless, and here's the thing, here's kind of the kicker to all of this. The last bullet point I have on the screen right now says upgrade can be done either in place or through migration. Now, an in-place upgrade is what we just did. An in-place upgrade is where you just put the DVD in and you tell it to go ahead and upgrade and it keeps all the settings in place. But you can also do an upgrade through migration. And the process of upgrading through migration is basically a process of backing up everything that you have on Windows Server 2003. Back up all your data, back up everything significant, and then wipe it clean and do a clean install of Windows Server 2008, and then restore everything from backup. Now, if you do that, then guess what? You don't have to upgrade from within the operating system. Matter of fact, you most likely wouldn't. You would most likely boot off the DVD and completely reformat and maybe repartition the hard drive. You could now upgrade to any version of Windows Server 2008 from any version of Windows Server 2003 because it's a clean install. And you don't have to stay within the same architecture. Maybe you were running the 32-bit version of Windows Server 2003 and now you want the 64-bit version of Windows Server 2008. You can do that if you do a migration. So that's one of the things that you want to keep in mind when deciding what to do about an upgrade and whether you want to do it in place or through a migration is understanding that when you do an in place upgrade, you do have certain restrictions that you have to meet. And that's the downside. But the upside of doing an in place upgrade is, as you saw, it was very easy, and there's really no additional configuration that has to happen after the fact because it keeps all of your settings in place. Now, the one last thing that I will mention here is I mentioned during migration, you back up all your data and then you restore it once you have the new operating system. Well, guess what? I would strongly recommend, although we didn't do it here, in a production environment, you always, always, always need to back up, and I mean do a complete backup of your server before doing the upgrade. So many things can go wrong during an upgrade. There could just be some hiccup in the system. There could be a power failure in the middle of things. Bad things happen. And so you want to make sure that worst case scenario, you can always go back to where you were before you started the upgrade. Alright, well that's pretty much all I have for you in this video. So after watching the video, you should now know how to describe the different versions of Windows Server 2008 and know how to select the right version to meet your needs in your environment. You should also now know how to install Windows Server 2008 and the Active Directory Domain Services role, and then also how to upgrade from Windows Server 2003.